The moment Linda stepped into the old, candlelit church, she felt a chill run down her spine. Her heart pounded, so hard she thought everyone could hear it. There was something about the atmosphere that felt heavy and unsettling. The quiet hum of voices seemed distant and hollow, like a muted echo in a cavern. Linda tried to steady herself, but her eyes kept drifting to the tall man standing near the altar. His hair was slicked back, and his expression was polite yet distant. He greeted relatives and friends with a cool, polite smile. He moved with such careful grace that something about him felt almost too controlled. Linda could not explain why, but the more she looked at him, the more uneasy she felt. Her daughter June had chosen him as her groom, yet Linda felt a new wave of worry that made her heart ache. She had to keep her composure, but her mind pulsed with dread. Was this man really who he said he was? Why did she feel like she had met his strange aura before? She could not recall any specific memory, but the sensation washed over her in a relentless wave. It set the tone for the most unsettling wedding day she would ever experience. Linda took several deep breaths and made her way down the aisle, trying to focus on her daughter. The bride, June, stood at the front in a soft, white dress that glowed in the gentle light. June's eyes sparkled with excitement, and her hair was styled in simple curls that cascaded over her shoulders. She radiated joy, the kind of pure joy Linda always wished for her only child. Yet Linda could not silence the deep sense of foreboding that throbbed in her mind. She tried to remind herself that this was June's day. A wedding is supposed to be a time of celebration, tears of happiness, dancing, and laughter. Linda had looked forward to this moment for years. She had imagined standing at June's side while her daughter tied the knot with a loving partner. She had pictured the family smiling for pictures and exchanging well wishes after the ceremony. However, she had never pictured the deep fear she now felt. She remembered the first time June spoke about this groom named Simon. That was a year ago, when June called Linda late at night, her voice trembling with excitement. "Mom," she had said, almost out of breath, "I've met someone special, and I think I'm in love." Linda had laughed at June's eagerness. For years, she had tried to make sure June was wise in love, avoid heartbreak, stay safe, and trust carefully. But June was an open-hearted soul, quick to love and quick to forgive. Linda admired that about her daughter, yet it also left her worried. Eventually, June told Linda more about Simon. He was 3 years older, an independent business consultant who traveled often. He was polite, accomplished, and charming. But Linda had never met him in person until 2 days before the wedding. The timing itself was odd. Why had he kept such distance? The reason, apparently, was that Simon's work took him abroad for months at a time. Linda did not know much beyond that. He had no family to speak of, or so June said. He was guarded about his past. At first, Linda assumed it might be a painful story. She tried to be understanding. After all, not everyone had a happy upbringing. But there had been no official introduction or engagement party, just a sudden announcement, and then this wedding date. Linda had pressed for details, but June had avoided them, saying that Simon would explain everything in due time. Now here they stood in the church, with Linda's unease growing with every passing minute. She saw how Simon glanced around nervously, as if he wanted to be sure of everyone who entered. He had that poised, slightly stiff posture. He nodded politely to anyone who greeted him, but Linda noticed the faint tightness around his eyes, like he was always on guard. He seemed kind to June, but there was something else beneath the surface. The more Linda watched him, the more she felt a cold sense of recognition that she could not place. Linda's best friend, Carol, touched Linda's arm and led her to a pew near the front. Carol noticed Linda's anxious expression and whispered, "What's wrong? It's your daughter's wedding day. Why do you look so worried?" Linda tried to smile. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I guess I'm just overwhelmed. It's happening so fast." Carol nodded, but her face showed concern. "Try to relax, Linda. You'll ruin your makeup," she teased, giving Linda's hand a gentle squeeze. Linda forced a smile, but the knot in her stomach remained. Before long, the ceremony began. The soft music played, and June walked down the aisle. The guests rose from their seats, eyes filled with emotion, as they watched the bride. Linda felt a rush of love for her daughter. She tried to focus on that feeling, hoping it would calm her nerves. However, every time she glanced at Simon, that prickling sense of dread returned. The officiant spoke kind words about love and commitment. June's eyes brimmed with happy tears. Simon stood straight and solemn, his voice calm as he repeated the vows. To anyone else, he might seem nervous or even shy. But Linda noticed how he avoided meeting her gaze. He looked everywhere, but at the face of the bride's mother. Something about that felt deliberate. When the ceremony ended, the guests erupted in applause. June and Simon were pronounced husband and wife, and he leaned in to kiss the bride. Despite Linda's unease, she clapped along with everyone else. She told herself that she was overthinking. Simon must simply have pre-wedding nerves. Still, the anxiety refused to leave her. At the reception, the music played softly in the background. People chatted at round tables while waiters served dinner. The bride and groom mingled among the guests, thanking everyone for coming. Linda tried her best to greet old friends and relatives. She even found genuine smiles and laughter at certain moments. The day, after all, was meant to be a happy one. But she could not keep her eyes off Simon. Midway through the night, Linda walked into the garden behind the reception hall for some fresh air. She was feeling overheated and wanted a moment alone. The night sky was clear, and the flowers around the edge of the garden gave off a sweet scent. She took deep breaths, letting the cool wind brush across her face. That was when she saw a silhouette near the old willow tree. It was Simon, standing alone in the shadows. Her heart skipped. She wondered if she should leave him be. But curiosity pushed her forward. She tiptoed closer, not wanting to alarm him, but also wanting to see him unguarded. He was on his phone, speaking in a low voice. She moved close enough to hear some of his hushed words. "I'm in," he said softly. "No one suspects a thing. Yes, I'll follow through." The rest of his words were too quiet for her to catch. Linda's chest tightened. The tone of his voice made it seem like he was part of something secretive. She felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Was he in some kind of trouble? Was he using June? The moment she realized she might be eavesdropping, Linda backed away, her footsteps careful. She did not want him to hear her. Then she hurried back inside the hall, her mind spinning with doubts. She approached June, who was laughing with friends near the dessert table. "Sweetheart," Linda said softly, touching her daughter's arm. "Can we talk for a moment?" June saw the serious look in her mother's eyes and nodded, excusing herself from the group. They stepped to a quieter corner. "What's wrong?" June asked, worry in her voice. Linda tried to remain calm. "I just saw Simon outside. He was on the phone, talking in a strange way. I'm worried, June. Do you know anything about his work? He seems very mysterious." June exhaled. "Mom, not this again," she whispered, shaking her head. "I know he's been private about certain things, but he told me he works with high-profile clients. It's all hush-hush and can't be discussed openly. He's promised to tell me more once we settle down." Linda felt a pang of concern. "I'm just worried about you. Today is your wedding day, and I want you to be safe. If there's anything he's hiding." June's eyes grew teary. "Mom, please. I need you to trust me. I know Simon may seem guarded, but he loves me. He would never hurt me." She paused, biting her lip. "He did mention that he has secrets about his past, but he promised they were not dangerous. Just painful memories. I decided I could accept that." Linda sighed. She did not want to ruin her daughter's day with a confrontation. Yet the uneasy feeling would not go away. "All right," she said softly, squeezing June's hand. "I'll try to keep an open mind. But promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," June whispered, then kissed her mother on the cheek. She walked back to her friends, a brittle smile on her face. Linda spent the rest of the evening feeling tense. She watched Simon closely. At times, he would laugh softly with people or hold June in a gentle embrace. Other times, he stood with an odd, far-away look in his eyes, like he was calculating something. Linda tried to dismiss it, telling herself she was imagining things. Yet every moment felt charged with suspicion. When the night ended, Linda had difficulty sleeping. The next day, June and Simon planned to take a short trip to a seaside cottage for a few days before returning to their new home in the city. Linda wanted to talk with Simon to ask him about his secrets. Yet she could not find the right moment. Fear that June would see her confrontation as meddling held her back. So Linda held her tongue, though the worry gnawed at her heart. After the wedding weekend, Linda returned to her own house in the next town. She lived alone. Her husband, June's father, had passed away many years ago. Linda busied herself with work and chores to keep her mind off her fears, but her thoughts were never at rest. Whenever she tried to sleep, she pictured Simon's cold stare in the church. She remembered the conversation he had on his phone that night. "I'm in. No one suspects." Those words kept repeating in her head like a broken record. A few days later, June called Linda. "Mom, Simon and I are heading to the city. We'd love for you to visit soon," she said. Her voice was cheerful, but Linda sensed a slight hesitation. Could June sense Linda's hidden doubts? Or was Linda imagining things? "I'd love to," Linda answered, wanting to be supportive. "I'll bring you a housewarming gift." The next weekend, Linda traveled to see their new apartment. It was in a tall, modern building with a glass facade. June was excited to show her around. The rooms were bright, decorated with tasteful, simple furniture. June and Simon had set up the living space with cozy details, soft pillows, small paintings, and a warm rug. Linda wanted to be happy for them, yet that tightness still gripped her chest. Simon greeted Linda politely. He made small talk about how the move went and thanked her for coming. Yet he again avoided meeting her eyes for more than a second. She caught a glimpse of worry in his face, though he tried to hide it. Linda found herself glancing around the apartment for any signs of trouble, financial documents, unusual items, or anything that might confirm her doubts. She did not see anything suspicious, and she began to think she might be unfairly judging him. She fought to stay cordial and avoid stirring up trouble. During lunch, June asked Simon to share the story of how he got into his line of work. He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's consulting," he began. "I help companies manage risks and reorganize their strategies. That's about it." His tone was cool, as if he had rehearsed the lines. Then, with an apologetic look at Linda, he stood. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to make a quick phone call." As soon as he left the room, Linda turned to June. "Has he told you anything more?" she whispered. June's face tensed, and she looked away. "Mom, he said it's complicated," June said softly. "He has to be discreet because of confidentiality. He travels a lot and meets important people. He can't just tell me all the details. I'm trying to respect his privacy. Please don't make this harder." Linda nodded, forcing herself to remain calm. She swallowed her doubts, but they continued to grow. Over the next few weeks, Linda noticed June becoming distant. The usual phone calls became shorter. June often said she was busy or that Simon was taking her on a short trip. Linda tried to be supportive, but each time she hung up, she felt more anxious. She worried that June was keeping secrets or was possibly being pressured by Simon. One evening, Linda was walking around her neighborhood, trying to clear her mind. That was when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, startled. A tall woman in a neat suit approached. The woman smiled politely and said, "Ms. Linda Carter?" Linda's heart fluttered. "Yes, that's me," she answered. The woman handed Linda a business card. "My name is Detective Ramirez. May I speak with you for a moment?" The word detective sent a burst of cold panic into Linda's veins. "Certainly," she said, her voice unsteady. They walked together to a nearby bench under a street lamp. Detective Ramirez cleared her throat. "I'm looking into someone named Simon Evans. I believe you recently married your daughter." Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, he did. Why? Is something wrong?" "We're gathering information," Detective Ramirez said. "We suspect that Simon Evans may not be who he claims. He could be involved in illegal activities. I can't share all the details right now, but we believe he's part of a group that targets wealthy individuals. They marry into a family gain access to funds, and then vanish. Linda's world seemed to tilt. She had to grip the bench to steady herself. "You think he married my daughter for money?" She felt a wave of sickness in her stomach. "But June doesn't have a lot of money. We live a modest life." Ramirez gave her a sad, sympathetic look. "Your daughter might be part of a bigger plan. Sometimes these con artists use a spouse to reach bigger fish, or to build a false identity. Has Simon asked about any family inheritance or property deeds, or anything that might give him financial gain?" Linda shook her head. "No, he hasn't asked me anything about that. But oh my goodness, if this is true, then June is in danger." The detective nodded gently. "We're not certain yet. That's why I'm talking to you. We want to make sure Miss June Carter is safe. If there is any suspicious activity, strange phone calls, hidden documents, sudden changes, we need to know." Linda thanked the detective, her mind spinning. She asked for a phone number where she could reach Ramirez. The detective told her to be cautious and not to confront Simon directly until she had more facts. If Linda learned anything else, she should call. That night, Linda hardly slept. All the strange events came back to her. Simon's guarded nature, his mysterious phone calls, the unsettling feeling of knowing that he might be lying about everything. She worried about her daughter, who seemed so in love, so trusting. Linda resolved to find out the truth and protect her child. The next morning, Linda dialed June's number. When June answered, she sounded tired. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked. "I just need to see you," Linda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been worried and—" June sighed. "Please, I know you're worried about Simon. But everything is fine. You don't have to keep poking around." Linda struggled not to mention the detective. She knew it would alarm June, and she was not ready to reveal the source of her concerns. "Just let me come by. We can have tea and talk." Reluctantly, June agreed to let Linda visit that afternoon. Linda arrived at their apartment to find June looking anxious. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her voice was subdued. Linda knew something was off. "Where's Simon?" she asked gently. "He left this morning on an urgent business trip," June said, wringing her hands. "He didn't even tell me where he was going. All he said was that he'd be back in a few days." Linda watched June's face carefully. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Tears sprang into June's eyes. I'm fine, but sometimes I feel like I barely know him. He disappears for days. He calls at odd hours. He's always meeting people I've never heard of." Her voice trembled. "I love him, but I feel like he's slipping away." Linda gently took June's hand. "Have you told him how you feel?" "I tried. He keeps saying there are things I wouldn't understand, things he can't explain. He's asked me to be patient. He says after a few more months, he'll be free of certain obligations." "I don't know what that means." Linda's stomach churned. "Have there been any unusual things? Documents, money transfers, or anything that just doesn't make sense?" June thought, then hesitated. "A few times, I've seen him studying some papers with strange names and codes. He shuts his laptop whenever I walk into the room. And I found a locked case in our closet. He told me not to touch it, that it contained important work documents." She sniffled. "Mom, I'm so confused." Linda's heart felt heavy. She wanted to tell June everything about the detective, but she also feared it might drive her daughter to panic or push her away. "Honey, I think we need answers," Linda said gently. "This marriage is a partnership. You deserve to know who you married." June nodded slowly. "I just don't know how to get him to open up." Linda exhaled. She decided to take a risk. "I spoke to someone who suggested that Simon might not be who he says he is. There's a chance he could be involved in something illegal." June's eyes widened and her voice shook. "What? That's impossible." Linda placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Sweetheart, I want it to be impossible. But I can't ignore the warning signs. I'm only telling you because I want to protect you. Promise me you'll be careful." June swallowed hard, tears in her eyes. "I promise, but I still love him. I can't imagine he's truly bad." Linda nodded. "Of course you do. And maybe there's some explanation that we haven't seen yet. Let's find it. Together." They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing what to do. June recalled details that Linda wrote down: times, dates, the names of people Simon mentioned in passing. The detective's words echoed in Linda's mind. "We're gathering information." Linda promised to share everything with Detective Ramirez. In the days that followed, Linda stayed in close contact with June. June reported that Simon returned one evening, looking more tense than ever. He paced around the apartment, refused to eat dinner, and locked himself in the office to make phone calls. June felt like she was living with a stranger. Then, late one night, Linda's phone buzzed. She jolted awake and checked the caller ID. It was June. Linda answered in a rush. "June? Is everything okay?" June's voice was quivering. "Mom, I'm so scared. Simon is gone again, but he left his briefcase by mistake. And it was unlocked. I looked inside." Linda's pulse hammered. "And what did you find?" "He has a fake passport and different IDs, all with other names. There's a list of what looks like financial targets. Mom, it's so suspicious. I don't know what to do." June began to cry softly, fear lacing every sob. Linda forced her own panic down, keeping her voice steady. "All right, sweetheart. Listen to me. We need to go to the police. I have the number of the detective who spoke to me. I think it's time we share these documents with her." June agreed, and Linda called Detective Ramirez the next morning. Ramirez sounded relieved to hear from Linda. "Bring the briefcase to our station," she instructed. "We'll keep June safe, and we'll gather more evidence. Simon is likely a con artist, and it's best we handle this carefully." Linda and June did as they were told. They felt tense and fearful, not knowing what Simon's reaction would be if he discovered the briefcase missing. With the police now involved, Linda hoped that they could protect June. At the station, the detective thanked June for her courage. "You're doing the right thing," Ramirez said. "We'll keep you safe, and we'll find out exactly what Simon is up to." The next few days were a blur of worry. The detective told Linda and June to remain out of sight. They stayed together at Linda's house, keeping the curtains drawn. June felt a swirl of emotions: heartbreak, betrayal, and confusion. She still loved Simon, or at least the person she thought he was. But she could no longer ignore the evidence. On the fourth day, Linda's phone rang. It was Detective Ramirez. "We have news," she said. "Simon Evans is not his real name. He's been wanted in multiple states for fraud and embezzlement. He even has ties to an international ring." Linda's stomach churned. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. She glanced at June, who stared wide-eyed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "There's more," Ramirez added gravely. "He may have been planning to use June's identity to launder money or to open international accounts. It's a complex operation." Linda closed her eyes, feeling a wave of sorrow. "What do we do now?" "We're setting trap," the detective said. "We have enough evidence to arrest him, but we need him to appear in person. June can help us by calling him and saying she wants to reconcile. We'll have officers waiting." June wiped her tears, her voice shaky. "I'll do it," she said, taking the phone from Linda. "Anything to stop him." So, a plan was set. June called Simon, sounding wounded but forgiving. She said she missed him and needed him to come back and talk. Simon, wary at first, said he had some urgent work abroad. But June pleaded, telling him she was lonely and desperate. At last, he agreed to return within 2 days. Linda listened with a heavy heart. She heard how her daughter's voice quivered with every word. She thought about the wedding day and how radiant June had been. The thought that her daughter had married a criminal tore Linda's heart. Finally, the day arrived. Police officers hid around Linda's neighborhood, prepared to act as soon as Simon arrived. June waited in the living room, trembling in a chair. Linda stayed in the next room, also shaking with nerves. As evening fell, a car pulled up outside. Linda watched from behind the curtains. Simon stepped out, looking around cautiously. He carried a small suitcase. He had no idea the police were watching his every move. June opened the door, letting him in. Simon's eyes flickered over June. He feigned concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. June swallowed, tears forming in her eyes. "I found your briefcase," she whispered, stepping aside. "Why didn't you tell me what was in it?" His face went pale. He tried to play it off, reaching for her hands. "June, darling, there's an explanation." But before he could continue, the front door burst open. Officers rushed in, guns drawn. Simon tried to run, but they were too fast. Detective Ramirez was right behind them. They seized Simon, pinned his arms behind his back, and read him his rights. June stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. Linda came forward to hold her trembling daughter. Simon looked at June, and in that moment, all his pretenses shattered. His face hardened. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, a strange note of regret in his voice. Then they led him away in handcuffs, out to the waiting squad car. June sobbed against Linda's shoulder, her pain raw and deep. Linda stroked her daughter's hair, tears sliding down her own cheeks. "It's all over," Linda whispered. "You're safe now." Detective Ramirez spoke gently to them. "He'll face charges for his crimes. We've recovered enough evidence to ensure he won't be free to hurt anyone else for a long time. I'm so sorry this happened to you." The shock left June shaken for days. She hardly ate or slept, replaying every moment she had spent with Simon. She was haunted by the idea that their entire relationship had been built on lies and manipulation. Linda took time off work to care for June, cooking her meals and comforting her as best she could. They talked late into the night about how love could sometimes blind good people, and how cunning someone can be when they pretend to care. Over time, June began to heal. She sought counseling to help her cope with the betrayal. Linda stayed by her side, offering support and love. With every passing week, June reclaimed a little more of her spirit. She realized that she was not to blame for Simon's deceit. He had preyed on her kindness and trust. That was on him, not on her. Months rolled by. The legal proceedings against Simon moved forward. Linda and June provided statements, handing over any documents that would help build the case. A heavy weight finally lifted from June's heart when she learned the judge had sentenced Simon to a lengthy prison term for his crimes. He would not be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt her. Though it was a painful lesson, June found strength in it. She grew closer to Linda than ever before. They bonded over their shared ordeal and realized that, despite the heartbreak, they still had each other. The rest of the family surrounded June with love and compassion, ensuring she never felt alone. In the year that followed, June found a new job in a design firm. She poured her heart into her work, and her creativity flourished. She smiled more often, and a warm glow returned to her eyes. Linda was proud of her daughter's resilience. They talked often about the future, about travel plans and new experiences. Life went on, and hope returned to their days. One sunny afternoon, a year after the nightmare, Linda and June met for lunch at a cozy cafe near the park. The air smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Sunlight poured in through large windows, lighting up June's face. June pushed a small gift box across the table. "Mom, this is for you," she said, smiling softly. Linda opened the box to find a simple silver necklace with a small heart charm. Tears pricked her eyes as she looked at June. "It's beautiful," Linda said, her voice trembling. "It's to thank you," June said, placing her hand on Linda's. "For protecting me, for believing me and staying by my side, for everything." Linda reached over and pulled June into a hug. They stayed like that for a long moment, mother and daughter bound by love and by a hardship they had overcome together. When they parted, June wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled. "I'm okay now, Mom," she said. "I really am. I feel stronger than I've ever been. I know there's still goodness in the world. And I know one day I'll find a real love. I won't be afraid." Linda smiled, nodding, her eyes shining with pride. "You deserve every happiness, sweetheart. I'm here for you always." Outside the cafe, the sun was bright, and the sky was free of clouds. Linda and June walked side by side through the park, leaves rustling in the breeze. A gentle warmth settled in Linda's heart, the kind that comes after surviving a storm. Yes, their lives had been turned upside down by Simon's deception, but they had each other. They had truth, and they had love that no criminal could ever destroy. As they walked, Linda thought back to that unsettling moment in the church on the wedding day, the way her heart had pounded, warning her of danger. She wished she had trusted her instincts sooner, yet she understood that life does not come with neat, easy signs. Sometimes, hearts want to believe the best in people, and villains hide behind soft smiles and gentle touches. But in the end, the truth had come out. June was safe, and a terrible plan had been exposed. They reached the small pond in the middle of the park. Ducks floated lazily on the water. The sun's reflection shimmered across the ripples. June leaned against Linda's shoulder, letting out a quiet sigh. "It's a beautiful day, Mom." Linda wrapped an arm around her daughter. "Yes, it is," she said softly. And for the first time in many months, Linda felt a peaceful certainty in her heart. The dark clouds had passed. She and her daughter were free to face life with renewed strength, guided by the love they shared. And that, more than anything, was a happy ending worth cherishing.